panel. My name is Adam Goodman. I'm the CEO of Goodman's Interior Structures. We're a 66-year-old third-generation office furniture business based here in Phoenix. And over the course of today's discussion, you're going to learn more about my epiphany about how systemic racism exists right in my company, right under my own nose. Like most people, I don't consider myself to be a racist, and that's why the term systemic racism can create so much consternation. This past weekend, I had a conversation with a local businessman. Really, it's a true story, just this past weekend, who simply didn't believe that systemic racism is a thing. And when I tried to push him on it a little bit, he started arguing against reparations somehow. We got to that, and how his grandparents didn't create slavery, and why is he being held responsible for it. Was a super confusing conversation for me. And what was clear to me is that we're not having enough dialogue about this, because he didn't even know the vocabulary to fight with against me or understand the framework of what I was talking about. But the good news is he assured me that he's not a racist. So that's good. Like he said like 4 or 5 times, he's not a racist. So we can feel good about that. In that term, systemic racism, systemic implicates every economic, social, and political institution in the country, including my business. And we don't just tolerate discrimination in my company. Our EEOC record is completely clean. Yet it's our unconscious prejudices and our implicit biases that combine to create a system that in aggregate is discriminatory. I recently did a diversity assessment within my own company, and I found that the census of our company reflects the overall percentages of the state of Arizona, almost exactly. Now, I could have stopped right there and been satisfied that our company is diverse, but those statistics don't tell the whole story. And when I looked deeper, I found disturbing disparities in terms of leadership, wages, and occupational sorting. And it gave me a roadmap of where I need to attack some of this unconscious bias and how to combat it. Now, I'm not an expert in this. In fact, I'm just beginning my journey. That's why I'm the moderator and not one of the expert panelists. So I'm looking forward to talking to these panelists and learning from them. And for now, if you all can introduce yourself, I've asked permission to call them by their first name, so I'm going to do it. Larry, would you mind please introducing yourself first?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you to One Community and Angela for all of the amazing work that you do around advocacy, ensure that diversity, inclusion, and equity continues to be in the core of what we do. So my name is Larry Johnson. I have the opportunity to serve as the 6th president of Phoenix College. Phoenix College is one of 10 colleges in the Maricopa Community College District. I also have the pleasure of serving as the first African-American to serve in this role in 100 years. And that certainly was a major milestone for me personally, but it reinforces the work that's happening in Arizona, the receptivity to having conversations around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and certainly how we can advance it in the educational space. Phoenix College serves about 20,000 students a year, and 70% of our students identify as minorities. So happy to be here, so happy to participate in this conversation, and I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. Essen, to my right, an introduction, please.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Again, as Larry said, just appreciate the opportunity and of One Community for inviting me to share a little bit today, to sit on today's panel. I've been a fan and a supporter of One Community for years and in various roles of mine, and so I've firsthand had the opportunity to really see the impact that you all are having. So I just want to continue to support that and wish you all more success as you move forward. So my name is Essen O2. I always help people with the pronunciation. It's just like the letters S, N together, SN, and the letter O and the number 2 together, O2, right? So, and if you mess it up, it's okay. I forgive you. I give you a little tip though. So I'm the manager of diversity and inclusion at Salt River Project, SRP. Joined right at the beginning of the pandemic in mid-March. And I have the privilege of really helping to figure out how do we as an organization fully harness the power, if you will, of diversity and inclusion in a way that builds greater belonging, builds greater equity, and helps us sustain what we do for our customers, for our employees, and for our communities. And I have a deep passion for diversity and inclusion, have been in this space for many years. I'm coming from the healthcare industry where I spent about 10 years. But the reason I do this is ultimately working towards the goal of equity. I think when we have when we have equity and we create conditions where people can thrive that are fair and just, then we really are able to shift the outcomes of our cities, our country, our world overall. And I've made it a personal goal of mine to really try to advance equity in the spaces that I occupy. And so that's something that is important to me and the why behind my work. And again, I'm excited to be here to share a little bit of what I've learned along the way in my journey, and to continue to learn as we do this from the great panelists that I'm sitting on this panel with. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Essen. Katee, please.
Hi there, I'm Katee Van Horn. I lead VH Included Consulting and Coaching. And yes, love to Angela and Janine and the One Community organization. They've just done amazing stuff for the state of Arizona and really across the country, being a leader in this work. So really appreciate being able to partner with them on this and many things that Angela asked me to do. The work that I do within VH Included Consulting and Coaching is really all around how do we think about organizations and how do we focus on the institutional and systemic inequities that we see in organizations. How do we break those down, and how do we create an environment where people can thrive? So not just survive, but truly thrive and build their skill set, build their path to their career, and make sure that they really have a great experience as an employee and an equitable experience as an employee. So making sure that we really create those environments within the organizations that we have in Arizona and across the globe.
Great, thank you very much. We have one more panelist who is not here yet, but she will be here soon, Lynn Smith from ADP. So we'll let her introduce herself when she comes out. The first question I want to ask you all, so I had my leadership team take the Harvard implicit bias test. And for the record, just to put it out there, I have a slight automatic bias towards white people and straight people. Who knew? I didn't think that, but it turns out I do. And in fact, everybody on our leadership team had at least a slight bias one way or the other. So the first question really is, what is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our decision making? And let's go in reverse order. Katee, can you start us off with that?
Absolutely. So quite honestly, the concept of unconscious bias is outdated. We need to talk about it being conscious bias at this point. We need to talk about the fact that when we are having these conversations, we need to be focused on, we all have bias. And if we are not aware of it, we need to do everything in our power to become aware of it. And really, bias is that leaning towards, when you're processing information, leaning towards a certain way, or believing certain things because of the experiences, the perspectives, the teachings from family members, parents, etc. All of the things that really weigh on us as we are filtering, 11 million pieces of data every minute. How do we think about and categorize different things that we encounter in our environment, and what shifts we need to make as we think about the bias and how that impacts us, especially as leaders, especially as, corporate citizens. So that's kind of in a nutshell when we're thinking about bias.
It's a really good point. It was an unconscious bias before I took the test. By definition, it's now a conscious bias.
Now you know.
Yeah, now I know. I'm not proud of it, but now I know. Essen, what can you tell us about unconscious bias or conscious bias?
Well, we might have to start using a new term now, right? Thanks to Katee. But the best way I've heard them described are as mental shortcuts. In these shortcuts, we're making all day, every day, right? Depending on the situations that we're in, and I think our brain makes these mental shortcuts. One way that we do this is to, or reason we do this is to keep ourselves safe, for one. So it's a self-preservation mechanism, but where unconscious biases really show up and have an impact on people around us is when when it comes to decision making, right? And we're making lots of small incremental decisions every day. One that comes up, and there are lots of different types of biases. Confirmation bias is one that I think we're all familiar with, which is sort of waiting to hear or to see something that reaffirms or that in your mind gives you confirmation that, for example, a stereotype is in fact true. And therefore now you've confirmed that, and now you can make a decision that's based on that unconscious bias. I think in the workplace where it becomes really important is sort of that whole, people think about it in these particular instances, but we're talking about the whole employee life cycle, if you will, from the moment someone applies for a position to how the hiring decision is made, to performance reviews, to promotions, to discipline. And I think we've got to think about unconscious bias in all of those nooks and crannies to really figure out how do we mitigate it. And so I'll stop there.
It's a really interesting point. I thought about it in several of those areas I hadn't thought about in terms of disciplining, and that makes a lot of sense that would factor into the decision making. Larry, do you have anything to add?
That's a loaded question, and certainly Essen and Katee have set the stage. When I think about unconscious bias, oftentimes it's the amplification of some of the insecurities that we inherently possess, oftentimes. And then it permeates in different ways. For example, I was a graduate student at Florida State University, go Noles, nothing against the ASU. And I participated in this course called Race, Class, and Sexuality. And that was a course of undergraduate students. The students, one of my classmates invited me in to stand in front of the classroom in Florida State, predominantly white institution, and ask the students to stereotype me. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know I was a graduate student. And the students began to stereotype me, and they said, well, what do you think about him? Oh, he has, several girlfriends was one of the stereotypes. Another stereotype was he drives this type of car, and this type of car has this type of rim on it. And they began to give more and more stereotypes, unconscious bias, because this is what they had been taught, this is what they knew, this is what they were familiar with. And at the end of that process, I had to say to them, I'm actually a graduate student, I'm completing my master's degree. I actually don't have the car with 20, 30-inch rims. I have a Dodge. I have a Dodge Stratus. But it was an educational experience for those students, but also me, in terms of really helping people to understand that, yes, we possess these unconscious biases. It's not necessarily negative in that we possess them, but it's an awareness that gets us to the point of becoming aware, and now the education can begin. So when we look at that in terms of the educational organizations from where I sit, I can't afford to possess any type of biases, because when students come to us from every walk of life, 150 countries represented at Phoenix College and 50 languages spoken, we must embrace all of the differences that exist in our organizations in order to get to a place where everyone feels valued and everyone feels like they are contributing to the success of the organization. And I'll stop there because there's a lot that I think we can say about this topic.
Thank you for that. By the way, if anybody wants to ask a question, I've got the chat open and I'm paying attention, so feel free to do that. Katee, I'm going to ask you a question directly, but certainly the other panelists can give their feedback. And honestly, I want some coaching from you. This is what you do for a living, so I'd like some coaching. In my company, our operations team, and when I say operations, this is the guys driving the trucks or in the warehouse or delivering the furniture, they are dominated by Hispanic males. About 70% of our operations team are Hispanic males, yet only 31% of our company is Hispanic. Meanwhile, and here comes the cringeworthy statistic, 91% of our sales team is white. The highest paid group in the company is white. I think you probably see the problem there. So I'm trying to find a way to show our operations team a career path that is available to them that they might not have ever even thought about before, because no one's blazed that trail before. It's an overwhelming and difficult sort of issue to start. And I watched an interview with you, Katee, where you talked about situations like this and said you don't have to boil the ocean, which gave me a lot of comfort, frankly. So I'm not as stressed about it, but I still don't know what to do. I'm just not stressed about it anymore. So what coaching advice do you have for me?
So I think the place to start is understanding what the role entails. And, you know, I am assuming you have a job description, you know what you're looking for from a competency perspective, from a values perspective, all of those things. And I think then starting to really evaluate the folks that are in that production role to see if some of them exhibit those competencies, and then have that one-on-one conversation with them of, is this something that would be of interest to you? I think part of it is that, you know, it's the, I can't see it, so I can't be it. And so there is that piece that we have to overcome. And there just has to be one person that's first. But I also want to be thoughtful about that, because you don't want to be only or othering people. So the best way to handle something like this is to think about maybe a cohort of folks that could start together and grow together. So if they're all starting at the same place and they're all starting in a cohort, that they can learn and grow and ask questions of each other, because there's probably more of a comfort because they know the folks, giving them those opportunities to really have that safe environment to grow and to really achieve this role and understand what the role takes, with obviously, you know, your coaching, your mentorship, but then also thinking about from your sales team that you currently have, who are the folks that you want to have as mentors and as sponsors. So, you know, mentoring meaning, you know, helping them and guiding them when they have questions, when they need help, but then also sponsoring them. And that's, you know, bringing them along on client visits, bringing them into meetings that they haven't been involved with before, giving them exposure to things that they maybe have not been exposed to before. All of those are just ways to really start to create this environment where folks know, hey, I do have this opportunity and this is a path I can take. Once you have that first cohort, then the dominoes will fall, and you're going to have more folks raising their hand going, oh, I can do that too. Oh, he's doing it, so I could do it too. And, you know, I think that's one of the pieces that it's always scary to be in that first group or to be that first person. Once you help them overcome that, and a cohort is a great way to do that, then I think that sets you up for continued success of, you know, kind of that being a career path for your team.
Wow, thank you. That's a terrific answer. I really appreciate that. And this idea of mentoring and sponsoring, I watched also a video of you talking about the difference between those two roles, which also kind of opened my mind up. So thank you for that. Anybody else, Essen or Larry, you have any thoughts about what advice?
I think that's a great response and a great approach. I would take a very similar approach as well. And the only other consideration or thing I would add is just thinking about what supports folks might need that may be unique because they may be put in an environment that's new and different, where people are established, where they maybe don't have the same level of exposure. They may not have the same natural mentorship that occurs. And so how do you make sure to build in those layers of support to really see that first cohort, right, be successful, and then others to see this as possible. And I want to be part of that. But I think everything you said, Katee, great suggestions and recommendations.
It really is. Thank you. Larry, anything you want to add?
And Katee made a good point about the application process. Oftentimes as employers, I think that we have very cookie cutter application profiles. And Katee probably knows this like the back of her hand. Oftentimes we have deficit language in our application, and deficit language in that if a person sees the job profile, they automatically say, I don't see myself in that job profile and those competencies. So I believe that as organizations, if we're aspiring to, you know, increase our diversity of women and you know, men and women of color, if that is the goal, we have to ensure that we understand the cultural competencies, that those are the cultural sensitivities, and then also how does that language then, how is it translated into the job application so that you can attract those applicants that you're looking for in order to meet those goals of the organization.
The deficit language you're talking about it's from the perspective of the candidate. It's what causes them to say,
Right.
This is not me. So that's really interesting. I've not heard that before. Thank you. All right, Essen O2, I have a question for you. I read a quote from you about the importance of creating a sense of belonging for employees and for customers. And you said you want to create an environment where everyone is welcome and respected and connected. And that's a lovely thought. It's a great, something I aspire to for sure. But but really, how do you do that? And to take it a little bit further, how do you do it without erecting rules of engagement that stifle the culture as it is?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, those things are aspirational, right? We wish we could walk into spaces where all of those elements existed, but the reality is that that it's rare, right? And it shouldn't be. We should have more spaces where we feel like we truly belong. And so really on the road to getting there, I think a couple things need to occur. I think within organizations, and if you kind of take things back to also just some even simplicity around diversity and inclusion, I like to think about diversity just simply as just who we are, right? Inclusion being, you know, what we do, and then really belonging is how we make people feel. Once we recognize who they are, once we've pulled them in and meaningfully included them, hopefully that leads us to a path of belonging. But I think we have to give people permission to bring their lived experiences and who they are into the places and spaces where they show up. That's really important, and I try to boil it down to, I guess, very basic terms in that way. But give people permission. A lot of times it's about not knowing, and people will sort of stay in this interesting space of walking a very thin line of bringing elements of themselves to different places and leaving others at home, right? And so how do you bring that full self into those spaces? And I think, you know, we have to reinforce a sense of psychological safety. Katee mentioned safety earlier, and I think that you know, creating spaces where you can have, for example, brave and honest and real conversations that may be taboo, right? We've been doing some of that at SRP, but what that does is it decreases, I think, proximity. A lot of times we're further away from people than we think. And when I say further away, meaning that we don't have an understanding of where they're coming from, we don't understand their perspective, their backgrounds, their lived experience. And by engaging in those types of dialogues and conversations, I think we can bring people much closer, build more empathy and compassion that in turn creates more spaces where people feel like they belong.
That's great, thank you. Anybody else have a thought about this idea of creating psychological safety and letting people come to the workplace as they are?
Yeah, so I think when I'm working with organizations, I start with inclusion, and it's exactly what Essen is talking about. It's making sure that you create this environment that people feel listened to and believed. Because I think a lot of times leaders, employees, if they don't have that same experience, they don't believe it if someone else says that that was their experience. And that's an unfortunate.
Believe as in, like, what's an example of not believing?
Hey, you know, I work with this leader and they, you know, don't treat me the same way that they treat everybody else on the team. Well, hey, that's not my experience, so it must not be true. So believing what they're saying, and we can, you know, take that in a lot of different places when we talk about listening and believing, but creating that environment where people feel like they are valuable to the organization, they are being heard. That's truly where you get to belonging as well. Because if they don't feel heard, if they don't feel like they have a career path and a place that they can grow, they'll leave. And then you're back to square one. And, you know, I think it's just something that we have to constantly keep in mind of listening and believing, and then also making changes to the experience for folks so it is equitable.
Great, thanks. Larry, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I love that response, Katee. And, you know, and I see the comment from Diane. One of the things that we have to continue to be conscious of is that when we think about diversity, inclusion, and equity, there's an automatic inclination to think about pigmentation or orientation or gender and ableism. Ableism is a topic that we have to talk about as well. So when Essen mentioned, you know, being coming to work and being your authentic self, how are we cultivating those environments for our our ADA accommodations for many of our colleagues. What opportunities are we providing to ensure that there are resources, that there are the same opportunities that we will present to our other minority groups, that everyone has access to that, and how are we, through our I would say our employment relations, cultivating that space where people feel free to share and feel free to bring their physical abilities, or to bring their mental and full self to the job, to just really engage in those courageous conversations. And I oftentimes think that as organizations, we can do more in that regard to ensure that all of our stakeholders are supported in our respective roles.
Thanks for mentioning that. Katee, did you want to add something to Diane's comment? Nope. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Johnson, Larry, this is for you. The 100-year history of Phoenix College is really unlike any other institution in the state. 100 years ago, racism and segregation were everywhere here, yet Phoenix College was founded as a way to make education accessible for all citizens. And I've lived here all my life. I didn't know that. And you picked up that little kernel and you leaned into that to expand on that legacy. And now Phoenix College is this rich, diverse institution that you've described. And it's a model for other colleges and, frankly, corporations throughout the country. It's a great example for the rest of us, particularly because change is so difficult in academia. It's notoriously difficult. Surely you have some people in your organization who weren't fully committed to this vision that you had of diversity and inclusion. And how did you bring them along? To put another way, how do you include someone who doesn't believe in inclusiveness?
That is a great question, Adam. And again, you point out a great attribute of the institution is that 100 years ago, we were founded for Black and brown young men and women who did not have access to other institutions. So that was the draw for me to the institution, is that this was a college that truly embraced diversity, inclusion, and equity. But we are doing things at the institution, for example, ways in which we're helping to amplify those differences and those commonalities that we share, is that we have a couple of events that we do at the institution, and one is called the Tunnel of Oppression. And I want to lift that for a couple of seconds. The Tunnel of Oppression allows the student, the community member, to go through a series of pods. So it's the storage pods. And we may have 10 to 12 pods, and each pod is an experience. Each one pod may be the indigenous population experience. One may be Black Lives Matter. One may be trans populations. And as students, faculty, and staff go through each of those experiences, they are, for 30 seconds to a minute, experiencing something unlike an experience that, that they may be familiar with, depending on their ethnicity, depending on their orientation and the like. And at the conclusion of that, there is a counselor at the institution who then works with those students to talk about that experience. It's more of a cathartic experience for them, but through a series of maybe 30 minutes, they have experienced society. And that is one of the ways in which we're cultivating an environment where our faculty, our staff, and students embrace the differences. And I would say that, I have not experienced in terms of a large group of resistance to that work, but because the college really embraces the topics of how can we make for a better experience for our students. With more than 150 different countries represented, we can't afford to not be inclusive. We can't afford to not cultivate or foster environments where students are free to express themselves, free to share, the differences in their country and in our country. And then what are the conflicts? What's the dichotomy there? So it is work that we consistently work on. When the death of George Floyd happened, immediately, I was in a quandary. As a Black male, do I respond? Do I send a message to the college community? Because I didn't want to seemingly impose, if you will, injustices that I know that are lived experiences for me onto, a college community. So I have to be very careful, even in my rhetoric and even in my approach to these topics, because this is an institution of higher learning. But what was so great to me is that the faculty were ready, the staff were ready, and we had a conversation on the college campus about it was virtually, so I don't want to say on the campus. We had a virtual conversation, and faculty, staff, and students alike were all engaged around What are you feeling? What does this mean historically? How can we as a college community come together to really bring about change, bring about awareness for our young Black and brown men who fear, going to the store and parents feeling as if they won't come home if they are dressed a certain way, if they look a certain way. So I think that the constant change and the constant unrest in our society has helped me as a president to truly work with my faculty and staff and students to have more of those courageous conversations, whereas before it may have been a little bit more difficult to get persons to understand the why. And it was important now that we have the why, now we can seriously move that conversation more from the why, and now what are we going to do to make sure our students and make sure our community feels valued as persons of color.
Well, that's great. The expression we've heard a lot lately this year is don't let a crisis go to waste. Like a crisis is always an opportunity. That's exactly what you did. Thank you. That's a super interesting and powerful exercise you went through. Essen or Katee, do you have any comments on this idea of bringing along those who don't want to come along?
I think we're in a place right now where, because of the murder of George Floyd and all of the other social unrest that's going on, there is a little bit of a reckoning that people are having to do with themselves and a lot of unlearning. So it's not just the learning journey that they're on, it's also dismantling beliefs, dismantling structures, systems, institutions that are racist and that are, places that have not supported marginalized groups in the past. So I think there's this need to live in the discomfort and be okay with that discomfort as a white person, be okay to, not have that lived experience, but go and talk to and go and read and learn on your own to be able to understand some of this, historical context, some of the things that have impacted people in marginalized communities, and then how you yourself, it's the whole concept that you were mentioning at the beginning of the call, Adam, of, well, I didn't, do this, so it's not my fault. That's not what it's about. It's about how do we educate ourselves for today to make things better and to unpack the things that need to be unpacked, or dismantle the things that we need to dismantle, to make sure everyone is included in the conversation and everyone is allowed to come along on the journey. And that learning piece and that digging in on this topic is hard, and it's scary and it's uncomfortable. And I mean, Adam, you're living it because you have, kind of checked your own places of, hey, where's my privilege and how am I not thinking about this? Asking questions, getting to talk to other people who have a different experience, going out and just looking around at what's going on in the world around us. Not really going out unless you're wearing a mask, but looking at what's going on in the world around you and really taking that in, and then making decisions from there. Once you have actually learned and grow, go talk to folks and learn more.
Thank you, Katee. Laura Lynn Smith, welcome. We're glad to have you here. First, you want to take a breath first? Can we ask you to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. And I apologize. I look like I'm sitting in like the shade here, so my apologies. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. I'm the Division Vice President and General Manager for our 180p location here in Tempe, Arizona. I've been with ADP for about 26 years, and it's been a great experience, and ADP is a wonderful company. So I appreciate the opportunity to join this group of esteemed colleagues on the panel.
So, all right, I'm going to hit you with a question right away. And the question is, what do you think we've been talking about so far? No, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not fair. I'm just kidding. The ADP's got a terrific reputation, as you said, as an employer that values diversity and inclusion. And that kind of culture just simply doesn't happen by accident. It's got to be very intentional. And such a large public organization like ADP with 57,000 employees, I would think that something like DEI needs to demonstrate an ROI for the company's bottom line. And if you are paying attention to that sentence, I said ADP DEI and ROI all in the same sentence. So I just don't want to confuse you there. Thank you very much. So my question is diversity and inclusion in itself the right thing to do because the community at large is a stakeholder in ADP, and that's the right thing to do? Or did it need to be justified as a financial return to shareholders somehow?
Yeah, so most companies, best-in-class companies recognize D&I as the right thing to do. We succeed together through diversity of thought. Having diverse workforces enables different companies to really leverage unique talents and experiences and continue to grow. Ethnically diverse companies, McKinsey and Company has published results that ethnically diverse companies are 33% more likely to outperform their peers. So, it's many different facets of outperforming. It's, better innovation, stronger associate engagement, outside of even just financial performance. So there's many different facets to this. I think most companies are really starting to realize that diversity and inclusion is incredibly important. And what you also start to see is in applicants, the talent that's looking for opportunities out within organizations, especially some of our younger generations, are expecting that companies have a D&I strategy and really embrace celebrating the employees of their company for who they are as individuals, bringing their authentic selves to work.
That's that last point hits on what's in it. Why I'm so interested in this. Before you came, I was talking about we've discovered a lot of frankly inequities in our company, and we've got some disparities that we've got to address. And what kills me is that we're working so hard to get the very best talent in the marketplace, and yet we've it's sort of an own goal. We're kind of stopping ourselves from getting the very best we can because of some stupid unconscious biases, which are now conscious biases. So yeah, that's really interesting. Anybody else have a comment about this idea of for reasons for a corporation to be or any organization to be committed to diversity, equity, inclusion? Yeah, please.
So I'll give you a real life example. I was working with a global company, and they are a mapping company. So mapping streets, mapping roads for cars. And they decided to kind of venture out into buildings as well. And so they had a group that actually was sitting in India who were wheelchair users or crutch users. And they actually said to everyone, well, it would be great if we started mapping out what buildings were accessible, how we can get into buildings, and how we can think about, in the US, we have regulations for ADA and making sure buildings are accessible, but that's not true globally. And so through this mapping technology that they have, they started mapping out buildings and saying, what's the best bike path that you can use? Or what's the building that only has stairs, that, doesn't have an elevator, all of these things. And so that just shifted the conversation. And it was something that someone that's not a wheelchair user probably wouldn't have even thought of. And it wouldn't have even been something, but it helped to, improve the technology that they were building. And so that's where you see that ROI, because now you have more people using it and spreading the word about, hey, this is something that you can use to actually figure out what buildings get into and not get into. And I love what Laura Lynn said about just the whole concept of, when you think about that ROI, it is, it's a nice to have, diversity is great, but the innovation that you can drive when you're sitting around a table and there's different people with different perspectives, different experiences, you will build better products. You will drive more innovation. You will have better bottom line results, period.
And I would just add a couple other points. One is that I think about this as a workforce and a broader sustainability issue with any entity or company, right? From a workforce standpoint, I think it was mentioned earlier, what are potential employees looking for in a match, right? What matters to them? This is a significant area that really makes a big deal to folks that are looking for that company or that organization to align themselves with. And increasingly, as we look at it from a generational standpoint, that's happening more and more. So I think there's a workforce sustainability issue there, but I think overall, yeah, if you're not innovating, if you're not developing new products, ideas, ways of delivering your service, because you lack that diversity in your workforce, then how long can you sustain? You know, SRP is a 117-year-old institution or organization, and you know, to the point earlier with Phoenix College being 100+ years old, you don't make it this long without thinking very differently, innovating, changing, and adapting to what's in front of you. And I think we've got to look a little bit further out and really be thinking about this as a sustainability opportunity. How do we sustain by leveraging diversity, equity, and inclusion as organizations, institutions, et cetera, companies?
Great point. As a third generation 66-year-old, it's not 100 and 117, but 66 ain't nothing. And you're right. That's a brilliant point. Another good reason to be thinking about this. Larry, did you want to add anything to it?
You know, I think about Adam and great, love Essen, Katee, and Laura Lynn's response. I think about then how do we ensure the continuity and the parity? So if we want our Gen Z to be a part of this movement, that's wonderful. But they're now becoming high school. They're becoming college students. But what about the generation before them now? How are we preparing as companies and as large organizations? What opportunities are we providing to provide mentorships to the now middle school kids, to the high school kids? Because if we truly want to see our companies grow, develop, and expand, I think there's a commitment to how we work with these young people through maybe job shadowing opportunities or work-based experiences to provide them, this is what you can become. This is what this organization is known for. And I believe if we continue to amplify our messages, but beginning with our young people, while they're in middle school and high school, they're now making decisions about what they desire to become in the future. And how can we partner with those school districts and those superintendents that before they get to me or ASU or any of the great, universities here, that they're already socialized to start thinking about not how different I am from others, but what commonalities we share. And I think that the onus is on us as leaders of those organizations to identify how we can partner with those K through 12 institutions to ensure that our young people are civically engaged when they get to higher education or when they move directly into those career spaces. If they desire to just get a certificate and go directly to work, they will already be aware of what DEI means, how they contribute to that as bringing their whole selves to work. And I believe that is an opportunity that we have as leaders.
Yeah, and Dr. Johnson, if I can chime in on that, what you just said is so important and so profound. And, many of us ask ourselves probably, well, how do we do that? How do we help support that effort, right? And sometimes the answer is so simple in terms of if you have, employee resource groups established in your company that already is not only focused on just diversity and inclusion, developing the members of that employee resource group, and also having that lens of community focus and paying it forward. At ADP, we have many different resource groups, and we focus on a couple different facets, associate development, growth, celebrating the diversity, and also looking at community organizations and schools where we can help support and connect with the youth. To your point early on, where they are able to then understand a vision, understand, their purpose, and create some type of focus in life that can help traject them, as they become adults. And so sometimes it's just taking what we have currently in place within our companies and figuring out how can we best maximize what we have to connect with that youth. And, and that's the future workforce for our companies.
there's a conversation going on in my company right now. As recently as last night, actually, we have a bunch of interior designers, obviously, on our staff, and it's come to our attention through some work we're doing with ASU that Native Americans, there are very few Native Americans in interior design, and we actually happen to have a woman, Indigenous woman, who's on our staff, and as a designer, and she was explaining in high school, she had no idea that career was a thing or that was available to her. And so we're right in the middle of talking about how do we, because we do a lot of work on the reservations, so how do we reach into those high schools, grab people and give them an opportunity to give them some exposure to here's a whole nother career that you could be thinking about, and maybe get a leg up on it.
Mm-hmm.
A question from the audience here. Question is, I'm just going to read it. In many ways, our society encourages some level of selfishness. This is not me saying this. Don't get mad at me. What are some practical ways we can create an environment of inclusiveness when there's a culture of stressful competition that creates a hostile environment? What are some practical ways we can create an environment of inclusiveness when there's a culture of stressful competition that creates a hostile environment? Let's take that.
I'll put my HR hat on for a moment here. A couple words flag for me. When you say hostile, that obviously that's not good. And so I'm gonna back off of that to answer it from the inclusion side of things. But if you truly are in an environment that is hostile, talk to your HR team and consider maybe this is not the place for you. But when you're thinking about that competitive, not inclusive environment, I think a lot of times it's just thinking of what values the organization has and do they align to you as a human. And, I think a lot of times when folks are in a sales environment, it kind of, you need to succeed, you need to have numbers, to have all of these things, but there's a way to do that ethically. And there's a way to do that in a fun, competitive way that doesn't create an environment where people don't feel good about it and don't feel good about themselves. I think from an inclusion perspective, it's also, are you setting up places where folks can mentor each other and help each other out? Hey, I'm really good at cold calling, but I'm not really good at closing the deal, or whatever it might be. So also creating environments where people are almost forced to help each other and give each other tips on different pieces of it. So it is more of a collaborative situation. It's not a us versus everybody else or me versus everyone else. But I think when I think about where I want to work, when I think about organizations I want to work with, I look at the values and look at, does that align to my values as a person? And that's, I think, where some folks, you got to find the right fit. And Adam is hiring, right? I'm just kidding.
Hostility is one of our core values, though.
No.
Yeah. I would add that that's an interesting question in an interesting situation, I guess, in the way the question was posed. But I think our diversity, what we personally bring to the table, and those experiences and who we are, in many ways, is our competitive advantage. I'm a fan of collectivism, and I think friendly competition is great. But how do you I guess do some reframing and even some leading up, down, and out in situations like that? Because I think this is a great leadership moment that we're experiencing, and I think there's an opportunity for folks to ask maybe different questions of their organizations, and to ask questions in ways that you may not have been able to ask them before. And I think they may be heard differently as well. And so I would suggest to the person that posed the question, maybe there's some opportunity for you to lead and present maybe a different opportunity that takes you more from a competitive environment to a collectivist environment, where you're really building value around the diversity and the differences that each of you bring into the organization or your team.
Great comment from Corey. Corey Rankin says it's not a zero-sum game. That equal rights for one does not mean less rights for others. So that's essentially what you're saying. Yes, I'm sorry, Laura Lynn.
Oh no, I was just going to add, if focus on creating a culture of curiosity as well. And that comes really from leadership. The more that we become curious and we have a thirst to learn and understand, there's so many resources out there. You know, you just go onto Google and you look up, you know, diversity sites, and, you know, what can you read, what can you watch, what can you listen to in terms of podcasts. As leadership demonstrates that curiosity and shares that information, it becomes part of that culture where you create more of an openness and an understanding and an awareness and an interest in hearing and learning about others. You know, we're all different and we're all not one thing. So where's our intersectionality? Where do we not intersect, but we're interested in learning more? That all can help create that culture where you can dampen, you know, any type of hostility. You know, and definitely if you're experiencing something, I agree, you know, talk with HR. But as, you know, the entire organization and the culture, whatever you can foster around continuing to be open and learn and curious will help minimize that collectively.
That's great. Thank you. We're in the final 9 minutes. And well, look, we've already established I'm a straight white male that's right-handed, and I'm frankly accustomed to getting a little bit more attention than I've been getting. So I'd like to turn the attention back to me for a second and talk about my needs, if that's all right with you all. But I have a serious situation that I would like some advice on. At my company, there's a Hispanic gentleman who is a fantastic leader. He's a mid-level manager. He's built a broad followership. He's a terrific contributor. And I want to promote him to join our senior leadership team, which is the C-suite, CFO, CIO, COO, all those people. And here's the thing, the senior leadership team is 80% white, as you might have guessed by now, where only 57% of the company is white. So I made this decision to promote him a few months ago, and by the way, he doesn't know this. So either the people on this call, just keep it to yourself. Don't tell him to just give me some time to deal with this. But I'm looking for advice on this because I'm kind of paralyzed about what to do. I haven't approached him yet because I don't want him to think that this is some sort of correcting an imbalance of demographics or something like that. But truly that he's earned it, and I can't come up with the words that sound like that's sincere, even though it is. So help me get through how to coach me on this, please. One at a time.
Oh, that's a good one, Adam. You know, a phrase came to my mind that I oftentimes hear my colleagues talk about, and that's the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome is where a person they do not feel as if they possess all of the essential prerequisites in order to move into a role that they have been placed into. And they question and they doubt themselves as to why they're there. Well, of course, you don't want him to feel that way or that person to feel that way. That's hard because of the conditions of present day. But I also think that it's important to always amplify all of the competencies that the person meets. They meet the competencies, therefore they are eligible for this promotion. But I also think that it's a place of vulnerability as well as a supervisor that we have to have with our employees. I mean, I'm the only person of color on my leadership team. I have great vice presidents who I've hired who are white men and white women. But I also had to take the opportunity for them to get to know me and to understand, you know, the decisions that I make is from a place of empathy and a place of care. In the reverse, I think it's important as well that it depends on the rapport that you have with that individual. If they feel safe with you, if they feel that they can be vulnerable with you, I don't think that they will have that imposter syndrome per se. They will feel like you truly chose them not to fulfill the diversity quota, but because they are truly a valued member of the team and they truly feel as if they can make a contribution.
Thank you for that. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? We're in the final 5 minutes.
I everything that Dr. Johnson said. It's spot on. It is truly is this person qualified for the job? Is that why you're giving them the job? Or are you giving the job because they are Hispanic? And it's just that simple. And highlighting that to everyone that you're talking about when you talk about this person, when you announce their promotion, it's sharing, here are the reasons why. Here are the things that they've brought to the table. Here are the accomplishments that they've done. Sharing those things, that's what's important. It's not about the color of their skin. I'm going to tell you, Adam, the fact that you're holding off on it is disappointing, because it is one of those things like, you got to step forward and actually lead this and take care of it. I do want to ask real quick, Dr. Johnson, Sandra wants to know if the pod training is available externally.
Thank you. The pod training that you talked about.
Yes, so we market it on the college community, and whenever we do that, just visit the college website and you are able to come. It's just, you can show up. Thank you.
Thank you, Katee, for stepping in as assistant moderator there. I appreciate that. Now we're in the last 4 minutes. Is there anything else that's left unsaid that you wanted to say about the general topic, why diversity matters, or any techniques or things you wanted to share with the audience? This is the time.
Adam, I would just, I'd say one, I appreciate your leadership on a couple of fronts. To your past question, I'm glad you're at least thinking about the potential responses to elevating someone to a senior or the C-suite team, because I think there are some realities there. And while I agree with what everyone said regarding just how to approach it, I think if a person is qualified, competent, has the skills and attributes, has the followership you're describing, they sound like an amazing candidate and they deserve to be there, based on that. I talked about this being a great leadership moment overall a few minutes ago, and I think your op-ed was a great one. One of the things that you mentioned there was that you took the time to assess your organization and to do a little bit of introspective peeling of the onion and saying, where may we be fooling ourselves, or where may we have some opportunities to really ask ourselves questions we haven't asked before. And I encourage organizations to do that. It's a great starting place. It's an opportunity to elevate voices that you may not have asked to contribute perspective before. It's a great time to look at your policies, your practices, workforce, obviously, but I think by going through that exercise, you do a few things. You create a deeper level of transparency. You show that this is a priority, and you find out a lot about who you are at the core of your organization, right? Are you living out those values? Are there places where they're misaligned? And what should you really focus your efforts and time on? And I think that will get you much further by just saying, look, here's where we're not doing a great job, and we want to be honest about that and acknowledge it, but here's what we're going to do about it. Let's be action oriented and really advance diversity, equity, inclusion within our organization.
I really appreciate that. Thank you for those kind words and advice going forward. 158, it feels like a pretty good spot to end, mostly because it was talking about me. So thank you, I appreciate that. On behalf of One Community, thank you all to the panelists. You guys were terrific. I hope we stay in touch. I really enjoyed talking to you today. And One Community, thanks for the work you're doing in the community. This has been great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.